The following podcast may be explicit. One Joe Young presents Adventures from the Shed, a tabletop RPG podcast. You can find us online at adventuresfromtheshed.com. Welcome to our fourth Sidebar episode of 2017. Chris and Joe start off by discussing things we wish both ourselves and others would do, whether as a player or game master in a tabletop role-playing game. Others in the cast join in as they arrive. Enjoy the podcast.
Hi, and welcome to The Shed for Adventures from the Shed. You can find us online at adventuresfromtheshed.com, on iTunes, Facebook, Stitcher Radio, Google+, Bing, all over the place. We have a special episode today. It is just this person I have here with me who is...
Chris.
And myself, Joe, and we are going to be doing a Sidebar episode today. And we're going to focus this around on things that... we think that we want to have somebody else doing that we would normally do. For example, one of the first things we'll talk about here is when you're a player, what do you wish the game master would do that you would do if you were the GM? So it's kind of one of those things that you're kind of calling your own bluff or asking somebody to do something you would do. And one of the reasons I thought this might be a fun sidebar is because I know when we sit around the table as a group of friends, sometimes it's really hard to bring up something you wish someone else would do, and you might just be reluctant to do it. And I thought maybe if we just talked about it openly, it might give some other people some ideas on how to handle it.
Yeah.
So, hey, go ahead and say hi, Chris.
Hey, it's Chris.
Hey.
I
said say hi, and you said hey. So here's one thing I wish you would do.
Oh, damn it. I know. I think it's almost like I do that because I'm after Kurt. He's like, hey, it's Kurt. And it's like, hey, it's Chris.
Hey.
It's like, it just goes along the lines.
So we're doing this sidebar right before we get some of our other episodes recorded today. So this is kind of a nice spot for us to just talk openly about a few things and see how it goes. So what do you think, Chris? I know one of the reasons I thought of this topic for us is we're both on the podcast and off the podcast. We're both players and game masters. I don't know, maybe kind of on a regular basis. I think both of us GM more often, but when it comes time to be a player, I know there are things that I wish would happen. What are your thoughts? How do you want to start us off?
I guess for me, I mean, I want to make sure a GM is, is open to, I don't know, not necessarily like breaking the rules, but for me, because I always try to think of things thematically, like if the session was like a TV show or a movie, how does it play out? What makes it cool for the cool story? And not necessarily so much about the rules, you know? So I kind of want the GM to kind of like think of it in that way where, well, the rules don't allow you to do that. Well, so what?
So what? I still want to do
What makes it dramatic? What makes it very, you know...
So if you can think of an example of where that happened when you were running a game, what did you allow when you normally wouldn't have, if you can think of it, or make up a good example, one of the
I think words. For me, I mean, I've done this as a GM, you know, and like other GMs might not because they're, you know, like my older brother is very stickler. He's very much strategy-based. So for him, it's almost like him against the player characters on how he plays it. Yeah. Right. So I kind of just let it play out. My thing is like whatever's cool to make the story awesome and like an epic scene, even though if it's something like, oh, I kind of want, you know, not that I'm trying to railroad my players ever, but I have an idea of like a start and a finish and type of thing. And I kind of want it how I have it in my head, how I think things are going to play out. And sometimes, you know, the players will always throw the monkey wrenches in and things don't go as planned. But sometimes, like, man, I never would have thought of that, and I'm glad that player brought that up, and that was very cool, you know. My things might just be, you know, I might need, I don't know, I guess you kind of want your players to, well, I guess we're still on the GM thing, maybe a little bit more.
We'll cover all of it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you kind of want your DM, you know, or GM, to try to be a little more open-minded about things and not so stuck on the rules and how things should play out. Or even maybe you don't want to get railroaded either. You know, you want them to be open to your improvisations or things like that.
So how do you think that's affected when, for example, say you're running a pre-published module, which I don't think you do that often, right?
I do. I'll take pieces from, because I'll usually have an idea for an adventure, and then for me it's like I need to get stats for this or this or this, and so I just do a search for that, and I end up pulling stuff from an adventure. I'm like, well, that's a cool little idea, so I'll take that one part or concept, and I'll meld that into what I already had, and it might be an offshoot of the main storyline, but it's not part of the main storyline.
So I was
but normally, yes, I don't go full blast straight story.
So let me use a little bit of an example there, because especially on the podcast, and maybe even only on the podcast, do I run the published adventures, because they fit the format so well.
Yeah.
We had Pathfinder Beginner Box, the Star Wars Age of Rebellion, our favorite, the D&D starter set, which we keep revisiting. It's such a great pre-published adventure, and I think I agree with you there, and I'm hesitant when I say keep it open, because I know how frustrated I was in some parts of these published adventures where I felt I want this scene to play out the way the players want it to, but I know if I change this, then I'm going to have to search through the book for all of the implications where,
Right.
If you kill Sally, then does Sally show up later in the story? Yeah. And if so, then how do I accommodate that change? Do I just, do the crappy thing and resurrect her, or maybe leave a note behind or something like that? So there is a piece of that when you're playing a published adventure, that I feel there's a certain bit of leeway given to the GM or DM. I think they're interchangeable. But it's tricky to do, because I still love to freeform it. My only problem with the starter set adventure was some of the formatting of the book and how things were linked wasn't clear. You really had to read through each part to see that the effect of doing action 1 in scene A really did have an effect in scene B and scene C or whatever it was. Those actions really could have a cascading effect.
Right.
And the scenario was written that way. So I still wanted to play it open, and I remember throughout that recording, I would get frustrated. I would feel like my hands were tied in certain spots, and that's not something I normally do. I try to let things stay open and free. So for a published adventure, it's so iffy. I mean, if you know it, I think as the person running the game, as a GM, if you know the adventure, feel free to mess around with it. That's the way I feel. And if I'm playing, I want that freedom, especially because that published adventure might be available to the public. And I might know it all as a player.
Right.
And it would be really cool if the GM would start messing around with that.
Right, which I had, I pulled some stuff from, which I think you played like on the end part of it with my group, a year or so ago, where I'd pulled some ideas from, like, I think it was the Age of Worms adventure path. I had certain lines of that I melded into mine. And one of the players, I could tell he obviously had read some of it, and he thought, and I was like, I had already switched it up, because I knew, there's a chance of that happening. So he thought it was going to go one way, and it completely didn't. He was confused, but that's fine, because you're going to have those players that are going to read ahead, maybe, if they have it available. Okay, well, that's another reason why I don't like to use published stuff all the time.
And I would say that fits with this first question. If I'm a player and I happen to know the adventure, like, I would love to play the D&D starter set as a player and have a GM mix it up. I would love that. And I would love to be doing that myself. When we first did it, and with the games that we play out of a starter box, I like to stick to what's there, simply because it's a representation of what people would buy. So if anybody's making a purchase decision off of our play, which might be a suspect thing to do regardless, if they happen to be, at least they'll get the full view of what we experienced out of the box, as written, etc. But I would love to play that starter set right from the beginning, from the Goblin ambush, and just have somebody kind of mix it up along the way. Maybe it starts with a Kobold ambush or something like that.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning, something a little different, and just go through the book and change this character to a different character or something like that.
Or the players are the guys ambushing somebody.
Yeah, there you go.
Something like that.
And that would fit, because players do all that kind of stuff. Bunch
of murder hobos.
So, exactly. For me, one of the things that I think that I do as a GM, that when I'm a player, I wish the GM would do for me, is when we're playing a game, when I'm the GM, and I feel like nobody is catching on to what I think should be going on, I lead. I specifically say, so the next thing that happens is, or maybe you want to try this, because as a player, when somebody sets up a scene and says, all right, you're standing in a room and there's a fireplace and a table, and I know this room is central to the plot, but all I've got is a fireplace and a table, and I say, I want to look around to see what else matters, or is there something hidden under the table, or is there something in the fireplace? And the answers are no, no, and no.
Right.
Okay, so
or,
now
or you get stuck on the rules like, well, you can do a search. Well, they just crapped out their roles. Well, you got to let them find the thing they need, you know. No,
so
agreed.
I'll lead
I agree
it.
with that.
If I'm in the same situation and I'm running the game, then I'll say, and one of the table legs seems a little bit shorter than the others. Throw something out there that sounds a little odd just to get someone to look. And even if it's not true, just anything to lead, to help, to give people some ideas. Maybe if you looked up the chimney, that's where Santa Claus is stuck or whatever, right? It's one of those things that I'll do as we're playing, and it makes a big difference. And look at this, JJ and Mickie walked in as we're 10 minutes in, and we don't have microphones set up, so you guys are just going to have to listen into us talking for a bit. Although if you shout, we'll hear you. Say hi loudly.
Hi, guys!
Hi, y'all. So when we're doing that, I love to lead. And what I notice when I listen back to our episodes is it usually means I talk a hell of a lot as GM, which is normal. Right, but we'll be in a situation. Listening back to that last episode, trying to prepare for today, I realized I set up the scene inside of the Rutherford. I don't know, like 15 times because I felt like I wanted to keep saying what was going on.
Yeah, and we were trying to, and we're as the players overthinking, they're planning ahead to have all the pieces just in case. What happens if this? What happens if this? And right, and then you're re-explaining, this is what it looks like, and this is how these people
and
are
I got a big kick out of it, and Mickey's in there, so she might chuckle at it, but from the time we arrived at the Rutherford to the point where Mickey's character walks in real time probably took 15, 20 seconds. I think we played that for more than half an hour, and it was just, all right, so the room looks like this, the outside looks like this. Kurt's character's waiting for the keyword to take a sniper shot, and we keep re-describing the guards. They're not really gargoyles.
I was like, wait a minute. What am I saying this? Am I saying this? Right, yeah.
So I guess in saying what I would do, I'm also presenting it as it's kind of a hazard that I felt like when I re-listened to that episode, I over-narrated. Although I think it may have helped, I feel like I said things over and over and took time away from the players. So that goes to one of the questions that I mentioned here. When I'm a GM, what do I catch myself doing that I wish I would stop? and that's kind of part of it. As I listen back to that episode, I feel like there probably could have been another 5 to 10 minutes of character interaction if I hadn't reiterated the scene as many times as I did. So I do find it that I guess it's one of these double-edged sword things that I love to lead the players. If I feel like they're not getting the scene I'm setting and they're not setting their own, then I'm going to lead them along and try and reiterate what's going on.
Right, I'm the same, and even if people listen back to the recent D&D episodes where. Yeah, I have set up a mystery and it's kind of confusing and what's going on. So I will use NPCs to kind of lead or kick off that next thing. They'll notice, okay, we should go check this out now.
And whether it's intentional or not, some of the times that gets me as a player. I'm thinking, all right, so now we have these bald people with eyes tattooed around their heads. What the hell is that?
Right.
And they know Bree? So I feel at that point I'm a little lost. I was so happy that they just exited the scene after saying we couldn't find the package. It's like they were done. Perfect. I don't have to think about them right now. It was nice.
Right.
That's JJ clearing his nose. So while we're on that, anything else you can think of that when you're a player, it's something you wish the GM would do that you would do if you were the GM?
I like just mentioning the NPC things. I like having a world with a lot of different characters, even if you don't, even if like you see them that one time, and man, it's like another 5 adventures before that dude shows up. And you're like, hey, it's always cool. And for me personally, I always like that. Like, oh, I remember that guy, and he just did this one cool thing, or had this little interaction with one character, and he's back again. It's I don't know. It's kind of like it has a little bit of nostalgia feel, a little bit sometimes. Like, the character came back, and even. Maybe he was a dick or something, but it's like, it's an annoying guy again. The PCs are like, that guy again.
Mr. Dick.
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of fun when you have more than just the PCs running around doing stuff,
I agree. I think one thing that you do as part of your preparation, it seems like everybody may get a first and last name. And my characters, my NPCs, I try and stick with a first name only. Yeah. Because I only have one word to remember them. But I think one of the things I find myself doing on occasion is I will give some NPCs first and last names, which is a freaking dead giveaway that they're important.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just Phil anymore. It's Bruce Flair. It's Champagne Horace. It's wow, I gave them 2 names. Oops.
Yeah. They're getting paid a little more. They might stick around.
So let's flip the tables on that. When you're the GM, what do you find your players not doing that you would do if you were a player?
Coming up with some background information that I could use later on, or to move a story along, or to create a whole adventure on. That's the big. And granted, we were using like the D&D starter set guys that have not much of any backstory,
right,
and all that. So I kind of like the last adventure. I kind of created a little bit of backstory for Bree with the introduction of the other characters. So, but yeah, I'd like players, even if just a couple lines, where I could use that for later on, and tie some things in to make it more interesting.
Now, this is kind of the opposite. It's something a player did that I liked, was when you did that to Mickey's character, Bree, Mickie rolled along with it.
Yeah, that was
and that's
awesome.
Perfect.
Yep.
Right? It's, blah, blah, blah. You still suck.
Yeah. These fucking guys again, right.
Exactly. Yeah, I know you. How'd you get in with this crowd, idiot?
Right. Yeah.
But that it's kind of the opposite of what we're talking about, things that we wish they would do. So, I mean, I would say that, too. That's a great point of when the situation is presented, I think the vast majority of the time, if it's not a published adventure, that the player has free agency in my games to be able to say, "Oh, I remember that guy from wherever," and poof, there's something there. That's something that both the player and the GM can work with.
Yep.
And I feel like I do that sometimes as a player. I know when I'm a player here in the shed, it's another thing too. Of I don't want to monopolize the podcast then either.
Yeah.
So it's a different thing with the format, but I love sitting there and playing, and I want to narrate a whole lot. JJ wants to know if I can add in here, and I think the short answer is yes. So I'm going to click the stop button, and we're going to be right back. You won't even know we were gone.
Commercial pause.
All right, and JJ is with us now.
Yay!
There he is. So yeah, JJ, our first question was, when you're a player, what do you wish the GM would do that you would do when you're the GM? Or something that you already do when you're the GM. And you're sitting there as GM saying, gosh, I wish these players would blank because I would.
Ooh.
Yeah. And you're a good one for this. I was started with Chris because just like you, both he and I are GM and player kind of regularly, probably GM more often in general.
Yeah. Honestly, when I get a chance to play, usually I've been GMing, so I just relish the break of not having to be every single NPC. So what do I wish would happen is, I would say just getting into the head of the character more. Like, I wish that we would all be better at doing what would my character do.
So use that and give me an example of something that you would have done as a player that you wish somebody had done when you were GM. And you can even make up an example or use a real world one. Like, think of a game you were running and a player didn't do something and it's like, I would have blank.
Ooh. Honestly, a lot of times, like, especially after Kurt mentioned that he wanted to bring up the notebook, and I tried to give him opportunities. Maybe I was being too underhanded or whatever, or he was too checked out. But
Kurt will do that on occasion.
He never took the opportunity to, bring the notebook into play, and it was one of the things that he laments about the whole Strahd campaign.
Yeah, that we went all goofy, and he wasn't thorough with his character.
Yeah.
So how do you, and I've kind of switched the question a little bit, but how do you manage that as a player? How do you do that thing that you wish the player would have done?
Honestly, it's a little of being a selfish dick and stealing the limelight when you can. for example, in Perils of Paradisi was the Strong Dawn, I tried to commit suicide by going into Hasara's realm, and like I was attempting to steal the spotlight. And I did. I did steal the spotlight, and I try to do that where I can because I feel like that's where character flaws and traits just come out. Is when you do something to steal the spotlight.
Okay.
So you almost want your players to all be ball hogs, so to speak.
Cool. So go ahead.
Just to speak about flaws, because I guess we're kind of doing both questions originally. Ball gags. Because we kind of moved into the second question. Have characters have flaws? Why do they have to be these superhero badasses that never make mistakes? Like, because then you could have the GM can use that, to like, oh, that guy, like, not that we went too crazy with Victor Bartok, but he stepped over the line, and you almost, all right, you're gonna get penalized for that, man.
I called him out.
You keep going down that road.
Yeah.
But yeah, that guy, everybody's not going to be perfect. Maybe have that, and I think it makes characters more interesting, and it could make the story where like maybe that PC, like, oh man, he's going to cause problems for the group, and they're going to have to deal with whatever that happens.
Yeah.
So I think that's cool to bring into as well.
And I think I was going to bring up, because I said go Paylor, I was going to bring up the Calvin thing again because it's one of those where I feel like if Calvin was in an interview, his strengths and weaknesses would have been the same thing. I proselytize all the time is my biggest strength, and I want everyone to go to the light of Paylor. My biggest weakness, I proselytize all the time, and I want everyone to. So it's one of those, I don't know, call it a perfect storm of easy character, because it wasn't difficult. That was easy character, but it was so much fun. And it was just, I grabbed onto something, and I overdid it. And it was something that somebody had posted on Facebook. At first, I found it annoying, but then I was on board.
Yeah, he wants to make a shirt or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's like, just because doing X might win the game, win the campaign, doesn't mean it is the what your character would do.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, Father Bartok chopping off someone's hand was probably one of the more extreme things you could do if you want to, quote unquote, win the campaign. But it was well within the realm of character traits that Father Bartok has. Yeah. He's got that twisted past and all of that.
Yeah, he's got some issues. So Mickie has a question here. The silent Mickie today. So it goes along with what we were just talking about. As a player, how do you ball hog but not showboat? Because I think those are two distinctly different things.
Yeah.
And if I got that right, it took you a while to choose those words. Yeah, and those are very well chosen words. Thank you. Yeah. So how do you do that? I guess for me, well, with Calvin. So the other thing I did with Calvin was I made him not particularly bold until a situation was dangerous. So the creepy doll head thing, he was not at all bold. He was just freaked out. He didn't want to go near it. But then when we got into actual combat, he would step in to defend somebody. But I think as far as the ball hog piece of proselytizing, I would just throw it in there. For example, rather than going through an entire sermon, which I probably could have taken the time to type up and everything, I would just say, he's going to sermonize now. We do a roll, and then I say, he was great. He loved it. Everyone loved it, and move on. And that's kind of, it's stealing the limelight briefly without necessarily overdoing it, without taking 10 minutes to actually speak out all that stuff that happened. What do you think, guys?
Well, for me, I typically, I'll reflect upon a session, and I'll use Calamity as my case in point.
Which we called Calamte.
Calamte, yep.
Okay.
My Paladin of Commerce, when we took the trip across the sea, I sort of retconned with Joe the reason why we were attacked by the pirates.
Yeah, that's true.
It was in between sessions. I was like, hey, I got this fantastic idea. What do you think? Can we make it happen? And to me, that's me showboating, so to speak, but in between in between sessions. Like I retcon it a little bit. I try to figure out how that session could have had more flavor.
And in a way, before Chris goes, I'll expand on that, because in a way that's an extra bit of cleverness there, because then you get that limelight. You get to hog the ball, as it were. Not the ball's a ball gag hog. But it's not just you. Now you're double teaming your time with the GM, because the GM participates in this bit of limelight that you just created as well. So it was interesting in that when that came up, we were both able to talk about it with knowledge. It wasn't just one side making something up. We both knew it, and we were able to expand.
Yeah, the world doesn't just exist when record is pressed.
No.
It keeps going. You can think upon it and, try to enrich the environment in between.
And I know it's tough a lot of times to think about the game in between, because not a lot of people do. But for those who are willing or desire to spend time in between game sessions to do it, that's a great way to approach it.
Yep.
Chris, what about you? How do you think you can be a ball hog but not showboat?
From a player standpoint, I guess you need to know your player and maybe his strengths, and just use those at the right spots where you're not trying to win the day all the time, but you're using that's my bag, so I'm going to shine right now because that's my thing, and everybody else should take a back seat so I could use what I'm good at.
That's a good point. Nobody else shot him in the knee. Right? That's something that was remembered for one character, very specific. And that definitely was a moment of hogging the ball. Oh, God, I want to shoot this guy so bad. Shoot him in the knee. He's going to shoot him. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Play to the character.
Or even, like, as you said, you kind of work something out with the GM. Like, you even have the GM kind of letting that PC have a little bit, of the limelight. It's the setup from the GM are kind of setting you up to make the play for it,
And I will, I guess, both confess and brag to a little bit of that, where I got the idea years ago. I was reading behind-the-scenes stuff with Star Trek The Next Generation, which, by the way, turned 30 just a couple of days ago, which is pretty cool.
That is crazy.
Now, that does make me feel substantially older, because
shit.
I was not a child when I watched that. But with that series, I went back, and there was so much stuff I read, and I want to say this was probably 10 or 15 years ago. I was reading about it, and they started the series as plot-driven. And then as the series went on, it went to character-driven story. The entire episode was around one character, one actor, or the character on the Enterprise or off the Enterprise. And they spent the whole time developing that character. So when I read that years ago, it was one of the things I thought of as we were going through a 30-episode campaign in the podcast. And I did this either 2 or 3 campaigns where we would spend an entire session, and for us that's either 3 or 4 episodes, and it's all based around one character. The one with Calamity was a good example in that each character got a section of the whole campaign, and this was their section. This was where we explored their backstory, where they were going. One of the times Chris was a guest star on it, he played Jer, I think was the cleric that was in Brittany's character's backstory, and that's how I used that piece. It expose the character so the player has more time with that one character. Definitely take the spotlight for several episodes for us, or for a full session and a regular game day. Right. So that's another way to do it, and that's a collaborative piece. It's both between the GM and the player.
Yeah, I've kind of forced that with like the little D&D thing, which is, I know it's kind of like I feel like it's kind of very last minute, the D&D stuff we're doing, just to kind of fill space.
It is.
So I've kind of forced Mickie to kind of all right, Breeze more center stage because of these other characters, but not completely, but it's a little bit more geared towards her, because if she wasn't there, then I couldn't really use those other guys that came in.
But I'll tell you, too,
it's a little more integral for a character to be there. Some
compliments to the chef on that. I still haven't thought of a name for the Dresden Files Adventures campaign, but I was calling yours Let Them Eat Dirt after the first session. I mean, that has a name. Okay. It was so easy to come up with it because you had a good, cohesive theme. So it was nice.
On the topic of showboating, though, like, for example, I feel like showboating is the player attempting to go above and beyond. And I don't think that should ever be punished. Like, I would love if Mickie would do a diary again, like she did with Nessalus.
I love that because I could write part of it. Yep.
You know, so like, you know, she's got this lore book with the Monster Hunter and the Dresden Files thing. She could totally be doing,
Mickey's
you
taking
know,
notes.
like, and I'm actually planning on doing, because of how anal retentive Fitz is going to be. After this mission is over, he will be handing out progress reports to the rest of the party.
Nice. Okay.
I'm going to hand him a belt, probably.
Belt,
What's gonna
yeah.
happen.
It has to be one of those canvas like Boy Scout belts where you
Yes!
pull it through and
Oh,
then it
totally.
holds by
Yeah,
tension.
yes.
Has to be one of those.
Yeah, I can dig it.
Yeah.
Like I plan on trying to get into Fitz better by actually submitting case files to the White Council, and I'll post those up on the website.
Nice.
And I'm also going to be doing progress reports for each of the player characters.
Nice.
It's actually a great idea.
And that's kind of one of the. It goes along with one of the questions. So here, one of the. It's twofold because it's both from GM and player perspective. When you're in that role, so when you're a GM or when you're a player, what do you catch yourself doing that you wish you could stop? And I think showboating would be one thing. But I think from that perspective, one of the pieces I was just thinking of, and I don't know if this is where you were going with it, Mickie, but the idea that when you're showboating, chances are it's other people that are being affected, not you. So other players are probably just sitting there saying, gosh, would he stop already? This is too far. And I'm wondering if that's part of the perspective that you were thinking. And for me, that's where I say, when I'm a player, what do I catch myself doing that I wish I could stop? And I've said it a little already. If I catch myself talking through the whole scene as a player, then nobody else is talking. I just want to lead somebody else. How about you go check that out?
Yeah.
All right. When we were fighting the Earth Elemental, I think it was the Earth Elemental and the creepy girl on the opposite sides
Yes.
of this house. Yep. Before we started that, and I know I wanted to go, I don't know, catch the little girl so the Earth Elemental wouldn't hurt us. I was nudging Bree. I'm like, Mickie, Bree, go grab her. If we kidnap her, then the Earth Elemental won't hurt us because I'm thinking she's controlling him. Yeah. I didn't want to just say, Cal's just charges in and does all this because that's
right.
Yeah. So I try to catch myself. A lot of times I don't.
I think for me, I catch myself putting too much of me into the character, and I need to stop doing. I need more of the character to come out. Like,
do you find yourself doing that, Mickie? Do you play snarky characters that are like you?
She's even mentioned that in the podcast before, like all my other characters.
My characters are all wholesome and perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Wholesome.
None of them are half-some.
A lot of quotes around that one.
A wholesome halfling.
I feel like if you have somebody who's showboating and if the other characters are getting quote-unquote annoyed by that or are resenting the lack of the spotlight, then they need to step up and do something to take the spotlight. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, if that spiraled out of control, that would be a problem.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're all adults here. We're all very aware of where the spotlight is pointed, and we tend to acquiesce to it. Like, if Kurt, we all got silent when Kurt did his flower bit.
Yeah,
that was the spotlight that was on him.
And when he started talking about real estate and banking and stuff, he knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, you talk. Tell us what's going on in the upstate.
Yeah,
That's
that
great.
was awesome.
But so another piece of that, and Chris and I were talking about it a little before you guys got here, but one of the reasons I thought this would be an interesting episode is that in reality, we know this, right? But in practicality, when you're sitting around a table with friends, especially when everyone thinks everyone else is having fun, it can be a lot more difficult to bring that up.
Yeah.
To actually interfere with someone taking a spotlight. Because you're thinking, well, if I do that, then we're going to argue the rest of the session. And I mean, we've experienced this before. JJ and I at somebody's house, we experienced that something that was an interruption during the session actually broke the group up. We didn't play again after that. And it followed, or immediately following this interaction was a 3 or 4 hour conversation about how we're all adults, but somehow we can't get over this. And so it was unfortunate. I wanted to approach it from that practicality. I know in reality we are indeed all adults sitting around the table, but it can take some time and, for that matter, some personal courage to just step up and say, I want to play a little. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right. I'm here too. Yeah. So it can be difficult to do. And I agree with your point that as adults we ought to be able to say it. But bringing that conversation up, broaching that topic, it can be difficult to do. So we thought maybe if we throw ideas out here, it might help people. But that was how we got kicked off. So I definitely agree with that. So what about, JJ, when you're, as a GM, what do you catch yourself doing while you're GMing that you wish you could stop, but you keep doing it anyway?
Honestly, I try to get more and more devious. I try
Mickie
to
nods.
and I end up outsmarting myself. Like I end up, getting to the point where, like, I have this entire elaborate thing going on, and you guys never do it. And we talked about that before too, about how you shouldn't expect a party to do something. You should just let it happen.
So let me take this in both directions with you. So, and I don't know if that completes your thought, but I'm going to interrupt. Sorry.
Right.
The idea that as a GM you're finding yourself creating more and more elaborate schemes. Now, what do you wish your players would do at that point? That you think you would do if you were a player?
See, that's the problem. Is it's hard to communicate that without. It's hard to be organic with that.
So
it's
what
hard
do you think if you had your perfect world, what questions would your players ask to get into your devious situation?
And that really is the question. It's like, the question would be, why are there 4 paths of Cheetos going down different directions?
Because there's a gamer at the end of each one.
Exactly, right? Like I'm trying to lead them down different paths, and I'm trying to entice them down different paths, and I'm going to use our mancation, the Groundhog Day scenario,
which was a whole lot of fun to GM.
It was
a couple of players off,
but like the players just were not getting it, and like eventually we had to say pause or time out as the GM and say, "Look, this is the Groundhog Day scenario." Oh, it all makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like Joe and I had no idea how much more obvious we could have gotten.
We told them over and over again, it's still Thursday. Yesterday was Wednesday. It's Thursday. It's been that way for 2 weeks.
Oh, well, that's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And
we used those words more than once, pretty much, for the last 2 weeks.
They were said in English multiple times.
Yeah. But,
so
yeah,
it's
a tricky
that.
one.
And those guys, everyone there is all, professionals that are high up in their careers. They're I would say they're all intelligent.
It's too obvious.
And it's
sometimes there is that where a child would get it and an adult would overthink it 1,000 times. Yeah.
So how do you solve that overthinking? How do you deus ex machina, but without force feeding?
So when I'm a GM, one thing that I do as a player that I wish more players would do is say, is there anything else here we need to know or do? Yeah. And I say it flat out.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish people would just ask that so that I can say yes or no.
What's important for us here?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
And I'm not necessarily going to tell you what it is, but if you say, is there anything else in this scene we need to know? And I say no, well, it's true. I'm not going to lie to you about that, especially because we want to continue with the game. But that is one thing. When I'm a GM, I do wish players would ask that question when they feel they need to. When you're struggling at that location and you're positive. I was saying this when you guys showed up. You find yourself in you find yourself in a room that has a table and a fireplace, and I say, all right, I look under the table, I look in the fireplace, and I look around the room. Do I find anything? And the GM says, nope, and nope. Now what?
Yeah.
and I'm saying, so from a GM perspective at that point is what I was saying is I would say something like, well, you kind of notice one of the table legs is shorter than the other, or maybe you should look up the chimney or something like that. But as a player at that point, I kind of wish that player would say, well, is there anything in this room? Because I was sure that this was central to the plot. Is there something here that I'm supposed to know? And then a yes or no would let me know not necessarily what my next step is, but how to even approach the space that I'm in, the situation.
And that all comes down to communication, I think. And that comes down to getting comfortable with your group and knowing how to communicate with each individual in the group. Yeah. Like, saying something to me might, saying, let's say, sentence X to me might trigger my, process of, ooh, there's something more in this room. Whereas, Chris and Kurt just, tune it out completely. Right. So it's a matter of knowing how to, and not even that, but as GM, sometimes it's hard saying the right word at the right time. It's hard remembering, oh crap, there was supposed to be something on the mantle so that they would know to tilt it to open up the secret door. Why didn't I describe that?
Yeah.
And
it's a good point, especially in
or you did and they missed it sometimes too.
Yeah.
Which,
and we mentioned the published adventure piece where some of those in when you compare a published adventure, which we do play substantially here in the shed, compared to a freeform world, which Chris and I is normally what we do otherwise, the idea that you can't monkey too much with a published adventure without necessarily ruining it. There might be pieces that can be salvaged from scene to scene, but then if you missed that piece and they never pulled that lever on the mantelpiece and they never found the Batcave, well, they're screwed because the Batcave is where the final scene happens, right? And so you've got to find a way to force that. So I agree with that, definitely.
And there's no going to bradygames.com to look up the walkthrough of the campaign, Like it's not like you can find the next story point in Final Fantasy 22.
Like Prima's Ultimate Guide to Open World Campaign.
Right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't think that exists. What else can we think of? I mean, as far as that, what I was thinking, the idea for this episode is DM and player wishes for the other side. What do you wish the other side of the table would do that you're pretty sure you would do when you're on the opposite side?
I mean, just speaking on that last point, which he mentioned with I find myself almost doing the same thing where you come up with this awesome, web of plot line and the characters are, and even if you drop the clues that somebody wasn't paying attention or you didn't reiterate to the right player characters so it would kick off. And it might be something like you'd mentioned something before, but they don't, and then you mentioned something new, and then they don't tie that old piece back, and that, then you're sitting there trying to figure out a way to move the story along. Yeah, it's the same thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to tie plot points together when they're separated by time.
Yeah,
that's a big tricky part,
especially here.
Yeah,
because we don't play
by
consistent.
A lot of time.
Consistent. World.
I think we'll be getting back into Dresden when we record later today, but the last time we played, I think, was a month ago. It was at the beginning of this month. It's probably a better way to put it. It was right at the beginning of September of 2017, and we're recording again at the end of September.
Yeah.
So it's been several weeks. And we'll be doing disparate things in between. We're recording the sidebar. We're going to put another episode onto Chris's game, and then we'll get back to Dresden, and then we'll have all that time in between and different things we're doing. And granted, we're an extremely talented group of individuals, but it's still difficult to do.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's why I feel my progress reports will help.
Yes.
Because...
And make sure you use some of the Google Doc that I created for the public information, because you'll be able to grab stuff that we talked about at the beginning of this and throw it into the progress report. Cletus started this way, Mora started this way, and has progressed to here.
Yep.
Right. So she no longer plays well with others, because that's Mickey's character. She doesn't put her toys away when she's done. Actually, I think she does. She's probably good about putting her stuff away.
But and that's one of those things that it's a quirk of a character, but it draws attention. It doesn't steal attention; it draws attention.
And that's probably another really good way to put it. The idea of the ball hog and the showboat, but drawing attention without stealing attention, I think, is another good way to word it. That every character at the table should have a memory that everyone else can recall of that character when you're done with any given session.
Yes.
If not, then that character didn't shine at all. There's got to be something during that session, cutting off the hand. There's got to be, like I was just mentioning with Kurt's character, Jamie. He knows all about the real estate stuff. He's old. You know what
stuck out last session for me was his word Overwatch.
Yeah,
like he was obsessed with the word Overwatch.
There you go. And that, to me, that's a good way to put it. That you're taking some of the time to establish something else about your character. Make a memory out of something that happened. And if you can recall something about each character at the end of it, then each character had a shining moment. I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And what about... So let's go back to the idea of... We're all normally a GM, but we all play as a player here. When you're a player, what do you wish you would stop doing?
Yeah, for me, it was that
just getting yourself.
Or not even that. Like, well, if I was in this situation, with the tactics, I'm like, well, I can't do that because maybe that character's not into that type of thing,
I love
I dumped that in too much. And a certain player, like with Kurt's spy thing, that works out, right?
Yeah.
But for this, I'm playing this, this priest that has a pass, so maybe he's not very tactically sound. Maybe he's more just rush in and start kicking in
He
heads.
is Russian.
Yeah. Just rush in and start just throwing punches. He just doesn't really want to think it through too much,
And there's a balance there. So what I was going to say, that the balance, I really liked it when Chris was talking about how many rounds are in a magazine of this weapon that Mickie might want to carry, and I mentioned, I want those full automatic little things that you see in the Matrix, and you knew right what Mac 10 or whatever, you knew right what it was and how many rounds they would hold, unless you got the extended magazine. And this conversation was definitely above the table, right? It was Chris telling Mickie about weapons, and that was really cool. But in character, that wouldn't have made as much sense.
It could work a little bit because and it hasn't come out yet, but a little bit more about his past, where that could make sense. He would know about weapons,
But it's neat to have both conversations,
right? Yeah.
So I get your point though. From the character perspective, there are things that the character wouldn't.
Right.
But then I always go back to just the flip side of it, and one of the hardest things to work with is the character knows a lot of stuff that the player doesn't yet. I mean, realistically, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Your character is a priest.
Yeah.
What do you know about being a priest? I mean, from the Vatican or anything of that type, other than what you may have read in the news or anything, what do you know about it? But your character realistically knows these things.
That's true.
So it's kind of a catch there, like that. What about you, JJ? What do you find yourself doing when you're a player that you wish you would stop?
Separating character knowledge from game knowledge.
Yeah.
I really, really wish I was able to voluntarily induce amnesia on certain things.
I get you. Yep.
Because I feel like I do a good job getting into the character, but I have a bad job of shutting up the brain of JJ.
Yeah. So I always picture, in my head, I'm picturing you're strategizing what pieces of the game your character can use in the next step.
Yeah.
And is that what you mean? You want to get away from that?
I can't just act organically. I'm always looking at the bigger picture of, okay, what's going on? Why is Joe sending us down this rabbit trail? It's almost like, for lack of a better word, I think you and I talked about it in 4th edition way back when, it's players versus the GM. I'm trying to beat the game rather than play my character.
Yeah.
And that's where I need to try to have more fun in that. I think that is why I haven't been able to enjoy Dungeon World.
Yeah.
Is because I'm always trying to beat the game, not play the character.
And I think, and to that, we'll use this as another piece of that topic. One of the things that you did with your character in Dungeon World a couple of times created memories that other people remember, to the point posting on Facebook and etc. People loved the way Strong Dawn, it was all about curry and what, right? So there were things that you did, the incense, and there were pieces you did that, whether you did them as what you felt your character would do or out of frustration with rules or whatever it was, they were things that other people latched onto that were high points of those characters. And I think that to me brings me to one of the things that that I feel I could stop when I'm a player is almost the opposite. Sometimes I just rush forth with what the character would do without paying attention to what I was saying the character should know. My character, Calvin, should have known all his spells, no question about it. But all I cared about was he's a cleric of Palor and it's all about light and fire. Yeah. So if I had the chance to cast a spell with light or fire, I didn't care if there was another one more useful. The character probably would have cared. Joe didn't. Joe didn't care about the rules. It was, can we use light or fire? Then do it. Yeah. Because I wanted to emphasize an aspect of the character. But the reality is he wasn't a stupid character.
Yeah.
If he knew that casting whatever spell would have been more beneficial, that character, what would the character do? Probably would have done that smart thing. But I have a hard time pushing myself into the rules in that way. I guess, I don't know if it's the opposite, but it feels like the opposite of I'm paying less attention to the rules, and probably my character and the party may suffer for that, but it brings a different aspect. Yeah. So I sometimes I wish I could just stop myself, read over my spells. And because I went through it. You guys saw this in the shed. I had all my spells taped along the side of the table, and I want to say it was close to the end of the Strahd campaign where I said, "Oh crap, I have that one," and it's been in front of me for 28 hours. But all of a sudden, I'm realizing I have it, and I'm like, "Well, I could have. That's a level 1 spell. I could have used that a long time ago."
And there is one thing about me that I think I've done a better job at is playing everybody else's character.
Yeah, because Mickie tells you to shut up a lot.
For a long time, I would play everybody's character, and I'm sure people who are listening recognize that.
I think you're shining there as far as improvement, if you call it that. In the Dresden Files Accelerated game, I think what helps is you haven't looked a lot at other people's sheets. And that may have been on purpose, but you don't necessarily know what other people have, which may be helping you to get there. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's a good thing, because that's like for me, when I recognize I'm doing something that I want to stop, and then I try, and I usually suck at it. But that great place to talk about improvements. What would you do differently, Chris, as a player, or maybe we'll keep the word wish in there. What do you wish you could do differently as a player, or for that matter, as a GM?
As a player, like, my big thing is just create a player that's completely different from me. That I'm kind of a character that I'm forced to really do something differently, and not worry about like how I would process what the scene. Yeah, that's the biggest thing for me.
I like
even if I try to get away, I tend to see myself going back and bring myself too much.
You end up back as Chris, the character.
Because if you think about it, and granted, like the Jared character was kind of supposed to be a certain way, but if you go back and look at a lot of my characters, they're very similar. Yeah, where they're kind of a low key kind of guy, like Simon from the Spy Thing, or Mr. Joshua for he's Spy Master. Yeah, these guys are they got a little bit of mystery about them, and they're not. I don't know. They're kind of like the calm guys, but they can. I don't know. It's interesting.
You need to play a hyperactive librarian.
Yeah, something. I don't know.
Yeah, we should play one time where it's the other players design your character for you.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That could be neat. Yeah.
Besides the jock guy, that was probably the only different guy played in the little Dresden.
Because Mickie tends to play. She tried to play Noctra as a lawful goody two shoes.
That's hard to do anyway.
It is.
But hard. She typically plays the thug. They shoot first, ask questions later type.
But in that adventure, it lended the character to that, because a lawful good character in Strahd is a thug for good. So it kind of fit.
Yeah, So I think getting somebody else's creation might be enough to draw you completely out of your
especially
your comfortable niche.
If they can put in personality traits that you have to follow, because that's a key piece. I think we do definitely gravitate towards a certain personality. Granted, I hardly ever play a character that's officially a bard, but I feel like that's what I end up playing. Some kind of character who's going to try and talk himself out of things rather than confronting. I tried to push that different with Calvin. I don't know how much it came off, but he was just Calvin, so that was a whole different thing. But I think that's a good point. When we do some of the box adventures, those characters actually do have information about them. But I think typically we just gravitate towards the way we want to play them, not necessarily the way they were. Chris mentioned earlier that the D&D starter set characters, they don't have a lot of detailed background, but there is a background on there. And I think actually Mickie might be the only one that stuck with her background. I'm not sure, because I don't know all of them. But she had her background on there, and it was really that she was I can't remember if it was an orphan or something, but she was a wayward child, got involved with bad things, and that's the way she played. Yeah. But that was natural for her, so it worked out. I think for me, when we play like that, I think it would be pretty cool to have the option of you design another player's character's personality, and the challenge is for them to actually play that without I guess devolving back to the usual character. That would be pretty cool, and that's something maybe we can try. 'Cause I think
We can
that
call
would
the
be a
campaign
blast.
character police.
Yes, and we could each keep track of what each other is doing. So we are close to the end, and Kurt just walked in. Kurt, say hi loud so it comes up on the microphones.
Hey everyone.
Hey, Kurt. We're talking, Kurt. Just so you know, we're talking this sidebar is about wishing what the other side would be doing. So essentially, DMs and players, what do you wish the other side would do that you think you do? So questions of like, when you're a player, what do you wish the GM would do that you would do if you were the GM? That kind of thing. Have more balls, is that what you said? Fondle. Oh, okay.
Ball fondlers.
Well, we were talking about ball hogging, which
Gagging.
it could be that, if you're the only one doing it, I suppose. Although we made it 55 minutes before Kurt showed up to fondle testicles. That was great.
It's pretty good.
But we're in pretty good shape otherwise.
See, like I said, everyone falls into their comfortable niches.
Exactly. Kurt has a certain comfortable spot. So do you have any thoughts with that, Kurt, that you just want to like do sign language and we can say what it was? But so we're talking about things like when you're a player, what do you catch yourself doing that you wish you could stop? Oh, JJ's going to hand you his microphone. Just put it up near your mouth, or you can wear it. Either way works. But when you're a player, what do you catch yourself doing that you wish you could stop?
I think one of the main things for me and a lot of players, we've talked about this before on some things, and you probably talked about it, we tend to kind of devolve into humor, often
Actually,
more juvenile
we didn't talk
humor.
about that except when we brought up Thielen and how he never got into character because we felt like we humorized the Strahd campaign and that didn't help.
It's tricky
But we
'cause-
didn't talk about it specifically. Go for it.
When I think about people like listening to us, sometimes I'm like, man, like this is all inside jokes and like junior high humor, and why would anyone want to listen to this? And I'm torn because on the one hand, we're a group of friends getting together and just have a good time. Like that's the point of why, or that's a major part of why we play. And obviously, we are having a good time doing that, or we wouldn't do it. But I also think it's a crutch. I think sometimes we step up to the line of like, my character should be doing something real here, or difficult, or challenging, or that's hard for me to role play. But it's easier to make a joke about, dungeon porn or testicles.
Yeah, and especially speaking of like the Curse of Strahd. I mean, it's an evil place, and you should be frightened for these things. And nobody really plays their characters as being scared.
Right. And if you've got 4 players, all it takes is one of the 4 in that moment to have the reaction of I'm going to crack a joke, and then we all go. And again, I'm not saying it's bad, but I do think that's something that sometimes as a player I'd be like, I'd like to play a campaign where we really are 100% in our character, and if our character wouldn't joke about dungeon porn, then I'm not going to say something about it.
Dungeon porn. We also made it 57 minutes before dungeon porn. Thank you.
Or whatever. I mean, we each have our, Mickie joking about shoes or Mama needs shoes or whatever.
Let's give you a moment to extrapolate on that. So now let's say you're a player in that situation, and you see all this stuff going on, and you look across the table and the GM is there. What do you wish the GM would do that you would have done if you were GM?
I don't know that and again, I'm just totally thinking because I walked in on this cold, but
that's why it's great to put you right on.
DM can solve that problem. I think that has to be a group decision to say
not a solution, but what could help.
Right. Well, sometimes you do it, which I like, which is you'll either say like inside voice, outside voice, or you might, or some DMs might say, did Thielen say that or did Kurt say that?
Yeah.
Because that brings you back to, hey, you're not really role-playing your character right now. And some players will take the hint and some won't.
Yeah.
And again, some groups may not want to play that way at all. They may want to, have that humor, the meta humor, or the between the players humor. But I do think sometimes it'd be fun to try to not do that.
Yeah.
When appropriate. Unless, now, having said that, if your character is a goofball, or has a funny trait like always eating curry, and you're playing that up or go paler, that's awesome. That's not a problem at all. It's when when you kind of step out of the character, and I'm criticizing myself more than anyone else, and it takes you out of the role playing.
Right.
And that's really part of the idea of this episode. What would you stop doing if you could?
Right.
So maybe you stop. No, if you could stop talking about dungeon porn, would you?
Right. Now, from the DM's perspective, I think there's a few things. One, you can if a player's playing a way that's not helpful, you can shift the focus away from that player in the moment.
How would you do it?
Well, like in the
that's
dungeon
the
world,
Yep.
you would often say, Chris, what is or Kurt, what is Truk doing right now?
Yep.
And then if you have at least 1 or 2 players who are in tune to what's happening, then they'll run with it. But again, you have to have a group where at least most of the people want to go a certain way.
Cool. All right, so let me just recap what we were talking about and see if we have any last thoughts. So again, I know I just did this a few moments ago when Kurt joined us, but the idea here is wishes for the other side. When you're a DM or player, what do you wish the other side would do? So when you're a player, what do you wish the GM would do that you would do? Same thing, vice versa with the GM and the player. And then when you're in either role, what do you catch yourself doing that you wish you could stop? So that's the idea of what we've approached today on this sidebar. Any last thoughts?
I assume you talked about responding to the Dungeon Master's emails and,
we
being
did
prepared for the game.
We talked about that in a group. There are people who want to participate in between sessions and people who don't care to, both of which are acceptable. But for the people who want to, there are ways to take advantage of that.
Right.
So you could come up with scenarios in between that you and the GM can collaborate on. And with that, you can create some advantage within the game.
I do think one thing as a player I sometimes wish that my GM might do was maybe set a clear expectation for what the prep for the game is going to be. Mm-hmm. So it's either I want you to listen to the prior episode, or I want you to listen to the last 15 minutes of the prior episode, or come prepared with your spells leveled up, which, we're adults. We should know that. But it actually, I think, to some degree, the DM is the leader there. And if you just get an email that says, I want you to show up at noon and have these 3 things done. Yep. And if 3 of the 4 players do it and the one guy doesn't, eventually he learns or she learns her lesson.
Or they quit.
Yeah, which is also probably fine. So, anyways, you probably want to wrap it up.
Any other thoughts, Chris?
No, I mean, speaking about that whole, you could work on things out of game as well. Whether it's your character or the GM, maybe sending an email with a couple lines of like, hey, this is what we're going to be getting into next time. Yep. So the players just think about it. It doesn't have to be very active, but it's that little seed's been planted, and maybe when we start the game, then they have an idea for something already prepared.
JJ, any other thoughts?
Not really. I think I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say.
Then let me throw out there. Oh, Kurt just raised his hand. All right, that's good then. Let me throw out there that as a GM, sometimes I wish players would actually read those emails I send out. All right, so you may want the GM to send them. The GM wants you to read them. So anyway, but to be fair, that's a great idea. Regardless of the game, whatever communication you are using as a group, use it. It's really that simple. And if you don't have a form of communication, create it so that you can address these problems. If you're only talking at the table, then make sure you set aside time to bring these things up so that you can talk about them at the table. Set aside 5 minutes at the beginning or the end or both of every session. Right. Say you don't communicate through table talk at that point, set up the email. You got your email group, set up your text group, your SMS group. Make sure you have something together where you are communicating with your players and your GM, and it has to be about what you guys are doing as people. Don't just make it about the game, because as people, we need to know who's available, when they can prepare, if they can prepare, what they're going to be ready with. Heck, who's bringing the snacks, who's bringing the drinks. Whatever it is, that communication is important to try and overcome all of these things we brought up today. JJ, you look like you have an idea.
Yeah, I do have an idea, and it kind of expounds on that. Like, as a GM, I wish my players would prepare more. As a player, I wish that I could live up to that expectation.
I think that is a perfect way to end this. Thank you, James. And for that, we can all say, Kurt, you have to say it louder.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The preceding podcast was brought to you by One Joe Young. You can find us online at adventuresfromtheshed.com.